Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video I'm going to be starting off my coverage of a highly anticipated Survivor season, where here I'm going to be doing a preseason power ranking for Australian Survivor, Australia versus the world. A pretty high caliber season of Survivor we're about to see here. Again, a tribe of Australian Survivor all-stars, some of the biggest names in Australian Survivor facing off against some of the biggest names from around the world. Where again, normally I would do a cast assessment for preseasons like this, though again with returnee seasons, I usually know a lot more about these players and have a better read on my assessment on their likelihoods to win, where again, because I'm doing a preseason power ranking here. Now, something I do have to say here as a bit of a disclaimer is the fact that I am technically spoiled on AU versus the world, but this will be a non-spoiler video. Where, again, if you do not know, a boot list started floating around that has been kind of debunked, yet it does seem like the winner from that boot list is accurate to where, again, I have seen that, I am spoiled on the season. However, the ranking that this video will be based around is actually a ranking I actually made once we learned to finalize casts, before I had seen those spoilers. Again, that is going to be the basis of this video here. And obviously, I'll be talking about things based on where my headset was at the time, not based on what I currently think now, as obviously that might change some things. And also to go along with that, that's also likely why I'm not going to do a mid-season power ranking for this season, but again, maybe I'll still do some sort of mid-season checkup, we'll see. But either way, yeah, I still will be ranking each of the players on this cast. It's not likely I felt like they were to win the game when they initially flown out, with obviously the number one pick here was my winner pick for the season. So with that, again, start off, we got 14 players to rank here. At number 14, the player who I think is the least likely to win Australia versus the world is George. And George, I think, is straight up completely screwed on this season. Mind you, I thought the same thing of Heroes vs. Villains, but I think this is even to a more ridiculous degree. I think this is quite possibly the worst starting tribe George could have possibly imagined, especially for a returnee season here. Again, the Australia tribe on this season is essentially a tribe of all friends and also a potential enemy of his in Shaunie, where, again, not even factoring in the fact that he is George, again, this massive target coming off of his previous seasons. Also someone that, again, isn't going to help in challenges. Again, I think there's a lot of struggles there, but in general, again, it just feels like he's kind of outside of the core power structure here, where, again, we have so many connections on the Australia tribe here. Again, we have David and Luke. We have David and Luke and Janine. We have David and Sarah, Luke and Sarah. We have even Luke and Kirby have a connection. Mind you, I believe George and Kirby might be on good terms. And again, I think him and Shaunie have kind of repaired things, but even then, I think there'll still be this like looming distrust of him to where, again, just in general, George is kind of screwed on this season. I would be mind blown if George makes it too deep on this season. Now, obviously, if there's a world where George somehow makes it to the merge, then at that point, I would not completely rule him out. Though even then, I feel like he's the type of player that would probably betray the Australian tribe and work with the world tribe. And at that point, again, would he really have win equity at the end if he betrayed his entire country? To where, again, I do think, again, George is just a player here that I just think is kind of screwed on this season. I just don't think this is particularly well set up for him. It just feels like a setup that has nothing going his way. And again, to be fair, I very much doubt him on Heroes vs. Villains. So obviously things could potentially change. But again, I would not be having really any faith on George just based on the layout of this season. So again, he's here number 14. Now number 13. And now we're moving on to another player that also kind of similar thing. I think this person's kind of screwed, even though, again, this is the player that if he gets to the end, probably wins, but almost no way that's going to happen. That player is Tony. And again, obviously, I love Tony. Tony's potentially my favorite player of all time. I think Tony's screwed on this season. Like, I think this is another setup that, again, I think he's set up pretty poorly for the World Tribe. I think he's set up to be on the bottom of the World Tribe. Well, I think the real main strong suits of him is the fact that he does have Siri and Parvati as two other USA players with him. The problem is that I also think that's actually going to put a target on his back. We're in a spot where, again, it's a tribe of 7, where 3 of them are from the US. And through that, again, there's not really much incentive for the people outside of the US side to not vote out a US players. They don't want to give them the outright majority. And even along with that, I don't know if Siri and Parvati are the type of players that would work with Tony to begin with, to where we even saw on Winners at War that Parvati didn't come out of it having the like highest opinion of Tony. But again, I think Tony is essentially in that George position, but on the World Tribe. Again, a spot where obviously he's coming off as a 2-time winner of the show, known as one of the most chaotic players there, to where, again, I think he's going to struggle here. Mind you, I could see some connections. I mean, I could see a world where he works with like Rob Bentelay. I think that's a connection I could see. Also, again, even like Tommy, aka just, again, the other men. But I do think with the women in particular, I do see him struggling here. I remember Lisa in particular was like pretty anti-Tony at the time of Winners at Ward, where again, maybe she shifted things since then. But again, I just don't think anyone's going to allow Tony to make it too deep here. But again, he's another one. If he makes it to the merge at that point, again, if he makes it to the end, again, he probably wins. But it's just a path that seems just so unlikely, where I just feel like this is a cast that, again, just doesn't really favor him. I kind of have other ideas of where this world tribe is potentially going to go. So because, again, I do think Tony is someone that just has, again, all the targets on his back. Again, 2-time winner from a relatively large USA contingent, but one that's still the minority. Also in the minority in the sense that there's less men on the tribe than women, where, again, I think just in general, not looking great for Tony. So again, for me, he's here number 13. Now number 12, and at number 12, we're kind of starting two people in a row here that I think are largely here just because they're largely unknown quantities. And while, again, I think if this was a normal Survivor season, I might be higher on them, but I think for a season like AU versus the World, I think this is definitely going to harm their chances. At number 12, though, I'm going to go with Tommy. Now, Tommy's a player that I've actually not been able to talk about in a formal video yet, because at the time that I did my cast assessment, he was not rumored. Kind of. Looking back at my cast reaction, obviously that video ended up being largely inaccurate because that was a point where the finalized cast had not come out yet, though there was a cast that felt in line with the press release that was released saying that there was a player from Survivor Norway. Turns out they lied, and it's a player from Survivor Finland instead. I don't know if there were like some last second cast changes or what, but either way, we have Tommy, someone that I know very little about. Tommy's actually the only person on this cast that I have never seen play Survivor before, but from what I've heard, again, he seemed like a pretty decent player, someone that, again, made it to final two, only lost by 1 vote at the end, supposedly had a pretty strategic mind, I believe is a fan of Survivor US, and in general, again, I think he's someone that seems to have potential. Again, if he were to coming into any random season, I feel like Tommy just seems like a kind of normal guy that would definitely have some legs in the game. However, I do feel like for AU versus the World, this is where I'm going to struggle with him, where, again, I don't know what his longevity necessarily is. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be an early boot, but I just feel like Tommy's this player that I would see struggling to win a jury vote, not necessarily because of what he did in the game, but more so because of when he gets to the end of the game, who's going to be rooting for Tommy to win this game. Again, someone that, again, no one knows coming into the season. I very much doubt anyone did any research into Survivor Finland. And beyond that, it's like, do they really want to crown this really unknown player the first ever winner of AU versus the World? So again, I just think that's a very strange dynamic here, one that I do think is going to harm Tommy on this season. Mixing out the fact that, again, I think from the World side of things, I do think All Girls Alliance is looking very strong, and I think through that, Tommy might not be in the initial best position either, but again, I think he's someone that could make it deep. So again, as far as I know about Tommy, I don't really see a reason why you would target Tommy early on, especially when you have like these bigger threats on the board. But I also feel like Tommy's just someone that, even if he gets to the end, I just feel like there's no way that he goes on to win. Where I do think there's going to be a lot of prestige being put into the eventual winner of the season. I think to give that to a complete unknown, I think would be unprecedented to me. So again, I have Tommy here, number 12. Now number 11, similar thing, though I think slightly better. At number 11, I do have Cass from Survivor Quebec. Also, another person I have not been able to talk about in a video, as again, she was also someone that was not on that cast that I talked about in the cast reaction. And she's someone that I know most people that are prepared to watch AU vs. the World probably don't know who this is. I have watched her season. Now, spoiler alert for Survivor Quebec, again, a finalist, was tied for second, got no votes, but a very competent player. I mean, she's another one that, again, is a super fan of the show, a very cerebral player, to the point where I was kind of surprised at how much her bio ends up hyping up how much of a challenge beast she is, which, again, she's definitely pretty physical, someone that will do well in these Australian Survivor challenges, but again, I did not feel like my takeaway from her game was the fact that she was this big challenge beast. But I think comparing her to a player that you might know a bit more, again, I think in terms of Survivor US, I think she's kind of Tasha-coded, especially Tasha in Cambodia, where I feel like her trajectory is essentially one where she essentially enables this, like, Jeremy-style figure to go on to win the game. She was essentially his right-hand man, contemplates turning on him at a point, but never actually does. But again, it's still a duo that did run a decent chunk of the game in a spot where it's kind of amazing that they were never truly targeted along the way. And again, I think for a losing game, Cass played a very impressive game on Quebec, to where, again, coming in this season, I think she has a lot of skills for a game. Again, I think she's someone that, again, even more so than Tommy, I would say has a lot of potential here. Again, on the World Tribe, I definitely see an all-women's alliance coming together. I do feel like this is just a group of women that feel very inclined to create an all-women's alliance, especially considering, again, the likes of Lisa and Cass being massive fans, and Sri and Parvati obviously having done this before, to where, again, I think in general, again, I very much see an all-women's alliance coming together, and I feel like Cass would be somewhat well-positioned in that. Now, again, I still think, like Tommy, there is going to be this worry about win equity. I think at the end, I think it's going to be tough for her to win a jury vote just based on the fact that, again, most people don't know who she is. Again, she was not rumored after they were flown out, so where I don't know if anyone did their research on Survivor Quebec, to where, again, I think that is something that's definitely going to harm her overall chances in the game. But I do just have more faith in her than Tommy. Again, mostly just because I've watched her before while I have not watched Tommy. But I also, again, just see her fitting into that initial alliance a bit more. So again, I do worry about her win equity. But again, someone that if this was not a AU vs. the World sort of season, I would have a decent amount of faith in her. I mean, she was actually my winner pick for for Survivor Quebec as well. And she has all the skills for the game. It's just I don't feel like this is the season that is prime for her to end up winning it. So again, for me, she's here at number 11. Now, number 10, moving on to another player that kind of in a similar ballpark, but just a bit more known. And I think someone that people definitely would have done the research on, which to her could be a negative, but at least to the point where I think people would maybe have respect for this person. And someone that I'm personally excited to see on this season. At number 10, we have Lisa. Obviously the winner of Survivor New Zealand, Thailand, and someone that I never thought we were going to see play Survivor again. And I'm really excited to see Lisa getting our chance here in a spot where, again, her first time around, pretty impressive win, where again, she's essentially the cast that actually made the move against her ally, pulling over, again, an insane vote off at the final 6, creating a 3-2-1 against her closest ally who had an idol in his pocket in a spot where she got her ally's best friend from high school to turn on him. Like, it is an insane move. So again, I think having a player that can make a move of that caliber back on this season is, again, going to be so fun to see. That being said, I don't know if Australian Survivor is really the best format for Lisa. Mind you, obviously, it's going to be a watered-down version where, again, considering the fact that I do see her being in that initial majority on the World Tribe, I feel like that could lead to her having some longevity where again, if Lisa makes it to the merge, I think that's going to be a very dangerous prospect. But I still would say there's probably like a little bit of worry if they do base it on like physical strength that Lisa could potentially be an early boot. Mind you, again, I do think there will be an all-women's alliance here, and I think Lisa is someone that I think 100% is going to be working with Siri and Parvati. I know, again, she's a massive super fan of the show, massive Siri fan, to where I just think in general, that is a connection I definitely see happening is Lisa, Parvati, Siri in particular. But I think as long as the tribe isn't really reliant on physical strength, I think Lisa is someone that could be well positioned to at least make it to the merge. And at that point, again, she could be a very dangerous player. I think an issue that might stem at that point is, again, I do think while, again, she is a more known quantity to some of these people, I do still think she will struggle with having this level of respect for most of the cast. I do feel like she's someone that is not going to be, again, on the level of a Siri, a Parvati, a Tony, a David, Luke, Shaunie, again, these names that are massive names that people would want to reward as the winner of AU versus the world. I feel like Lisa doesn't really fit into that, sadly. So again, I think she's going to have to make some really big plays in that end game to gather that respect to go on to win the game. But again, she is certainly a capable player. Again, we saw her pull out a pretty miraculous win on NZ Thailand, a spot where like midway through the season, I really did not think she had much of a chance to do it. But again, she plays a very impressive game there. I'm hoping she plays an equally impressive game here. Yeah, I do think, again, there are those downsides to her. The fact that, again, I think there's at least a chance that she could be a potential early boot, along the fact that I think inherent respect is probably not going to be there as much for Lisa as there are with these other players on the board. So again, because that Lisa's here at number 10. Now, number 9, now we're moving on to similar thing, but probably not in as much danger early on, and that player is Rob Bentley from Survivor South Africa. And again, insane that we're getting Rob Bentley on another Survivor season. Again, someone that, if you do not know, again, probably the best Survivor South Africa player, one of the best players globally, and played an extremely dominant game. Ran the show for the majority of it. Again, there was like a post-swap phase where he kind of gets screwed over. Denver has to go to Tribal, and then there was also a spot the final 5 where things were a little bit rocky. But either way, very impressive performance. I would say, again, in line of someone like a Jeremy Collins, Second Chance. Again, very good game, very good player, at least for what we're shown. And something that I've always worried about Rob Bentley is the fact that he is a very honor-bound player. He's someone that kind of preaches about honesty and loyalty, again, comes off hypocritical at points. And I do think he's someone that definitely has that like Mike Turner or like coach aspect to him that can be a bit of an issue. Where the one worry I've always had about Rob Bentley is thinking the fact that, again, the cast that he had was kind of the perfect cast for him. Where I do wonder how he would do on a cast filled with more like super fans or like hardcore gamers like we're going to see here. Yeah, I still feel like Rob is someone that, again, like very unlikely to see Rob be voted out early on. Again, he is obviously such a massive presence in challenges. I mean, we see him right away in the trailer facing off against David in a spot where like he's clearly the physical anchor of his tribe. And I think he's someone primed to make it to the merge. Mind you, I think he's probably the most likely merge boot where straight up, I do think Australia has a massive advantage on this season. Obviously, it is, again, their show. And through that, I think just all around production would very much want an Australia win. So I would not be shocked if things are kind of stacked in their favor to where, again, I would assume that Australia would have the majority coming to the merge. And again, with that, I feel like Rob would be the most easy person to pick off right away as this big physical threat. I also feel like Rob is in this position, especially on a shorter season, that like he could potentially win out. I mean, he tied the record at the time for most immunity wins at 5 on his season. That he didn't give anyone an opportunity to take him out towards the end game stretch. And I do feel like he's someone that here could potentially do a same thing. Or again, if he makes it to the merge, or again, he's probably the most physical presence on this cast. And considering, we just saw Kaylin obviously dominate in challenges in a Brains of Brawn 2. Again, like, Rob is very much in a similar sort of build from a competitive standpoint, to where, again, I think he's definitely somebody that could do very well in these, like, Australian Survivor challenges. I would say, again, like, I think inherently, I would say that he probably is coming into the game, again, probably in the minority. Again, I would expect an all-women's alliance on the world side of things, but I do think he's probably the most likely to win of the men from the world tribe, where, again, I think Tony's just in a lot of danger early on. Even deep into the game, I don't know if he'll ever able to pick up allies, where I feel like, again, Tommy is someone that, again, can make it deep, but just someone that won't win the game. I feel like Rob is kind of in the middle of those two, to where, while I do have, again, like, maybe some question marks on him in general as a player, I do feel like on this season, he's someone that should be primed for at least a spot to the merge, and maybe from that point on is able to dominate the game in challenges. And again, if he gets to the end through that, I could see a world where he's rewarded the win, especially if he's not against some of these, like, heavy hitters. But again, while Rob is someone that, again, I think I would definitely have some worries about long term, I would assume he would be a bit more consistent than some of the players we talked about beforehand. So again, they're number 9. Now number 8. And at number 8, we're finally moving on to the next AU person. Again, the first AU person I'm talking about since George. But at number 8, I'm going to go with David. And David is in this weird spot here where David is clearly, like, one of the biggest names on the board here. Again, he is one of the biggest names on the Australia tribe, which can be a pro and a con. I feel like he's in this spot where he obviously has this massive bullseye on his back. I think in most cases he would be the clear target from the world tribe once they get to the merge. Mind you, this is obviously a post-Dondi 2 world, to where, and this is literally, like, weeks after the filming of Dondi 2, to which him and Parvati have a connection here that, again, the others probably won't know exactly how close they are. Again, they do know that they did just film Dondi together, but again, they probably won't know just how close they were on Dondi. And obviously, again, they won't know the fact that David won a whole bunch of money there, where, again, if they did know that, they would probably also put a bigger target on his back. But even then, even without that, he does still have a pretty massive target on his back. However, unlike George, I feel like this is actually probably the safest landing spot for David on our tourney season, where, again, this is essentially a tribe of all of his friends, where I don't think he could have asked for a better tribe. I mean, he's literally in a tribe, again, with Luke, his number 1 ally from 2019. Janine, where while Janine, again, took him out, again, he was later on Celebrity Apprentice, where she was a judge. And again, I'm sure that relationship has been mended since then. Also, again, obviously has a connection to Shaunie from All Stars, has a connection to Sarah before even he was on Survivor, where I believe the story is that Sarah was the one that actually convinced him to apply for Survivor. And then again, mixing in also through his connection with Luke, they have a connection to Kirby. Again, like, David is very well situated here, to where literally the only person he has no real connective tissue to here is George. To where, while, again, George is obviously a very dangerous player, I do think David is someone that obviously is going to have the massive leg up here, and someone that, again, is just, like, pretty much right in the middle of this tribe, in a spot that, again, I don't think you could have asked for better from David. Now, again, I think the big issue is coming into the merge. I think once we get to the merge, I think he's just such a massive target on the board that I would be very surprised if they allow him to get to the end, where even though, again, he does have this connection with Parvati, and I'm sure they're going to attempt to work together, I don't see this being a spot where David's actually able to make it to the very end. For a while, again, if he makes it to the end, I think he's obviously going to be a name worthy enough to be the winner of AU versus the world. I just feel like, considering the massive target on his back, I feel like he's probably the least likely to actually get there outside of George of the AU tribe, where while, again, I do think the AU tribe is going to dominate here. I think they're decently set up challenge-wise, and again, David's just put in a pretty good position within that. I just don't think he'll be able to ride out the entire wave to the end. Again, if he is a very likely winner, unless Parvati reveals how much money he made, to where obviously they wouldn't want him to make more money. But still, I do think he is, again, a pretty decent spot to go on the win if he makes it there. I just feel like he is probably the person that is the least likely of the people within that core power structure on the AU tribe, just considering the massive target on his back. So again, because of that, for me, he's here number 8. Now number 7. At number 7, we're going back to the world tribe. Again, going from one Dondi castmate to another, we have Parvati. And Parvati's in this interesting spot here, where I actually feel like Parvati's reputation coming into this season is very different than what it was in her previous returnee seasons. Again, Heroes vs. Villains, Winners at War, even Micronesia. Again, people came in not really wanting to work with her, and for Micronesia, probably people wanted to work with her a bit more. But still, it's like, I think there is a lot of sentiment about how dangerous of a player Parvati is. People just want to take her out right away. I don't feel like that's going to be the case on this season. I feel like in this spot, again, someone like Tony is someone that has more of that reputation, where also Parvati's, again, coming in with a pretty decent landing spot here. Again, having Siri as a built-in number 1 ally there. Along with that, also, again, I think Lisa is someone that very much will want to work with her. Cass is also someone that I see very much wanting to work with. Parvati, where, again, I just see this, like, instant all-women's alliance coming together on the World Tribe, which is something that very much benefits Parvati. Also, again, adding in the connection to David on the other side. Again, I do think Parvati is set up decently well on this season. The downsides are the fact that she's from the World Tribe on an AU versus the World season. And I think that inherently is a disadvantage where, again, I think the Australians are going to dominate. I think also the Australians are probably going to have the majority on the jury. I think that's also going to be a benefit to the Australians where, again, in these like versus the world sort of situations, we always see this like national pride from the home country to where I do think there is going to be a notion of wanting an Australian to win AU versus the world. And I think for someone like Parvati, that is going to be a worry there. Mind you, I think if a world player were to overcome that situation, it would be someone like Parvati and the other world player that we still have to talk about, where I think those would also be very good stories for those people to eventually win a versus the world season. But I still think it is a massive disadvantage here coming into the season. I just think the AU tribe is just massively favored over you. And again, like David, I feel like, again, the reputation will probably eventually, I think coming into merge, especially in a world without like a Tony, I feel like Parvati would definitely be one of the biggest threats from that side, especially when you're factoring in challenge wins as well, where I feel like she's someone that, again, is obviously capable to win challenges in a spot where the other U.S. person probably can't, to where I think that would also put a bigger bullseye on their back, to where Parvati here, again, I think is actually like not terribly positioned on the World Tribe. I just feel like, again, like long term, I do think there's going to be a target on her back, and one where I just think the Australians just have the massive advantage here. Not just in terms of navigation in the game, but also potentially on the jury as well. To where, again, I think Parvati, while one of the most likely to win from the World Tribe, I just don't think the World Tribe is particularly set up that well. So again, she's here at number 7. At number 6, moving on to the last person from the World Tribe. Again, this early on. But someone that, again, I think is in a spot where if they make it to the end, it's going to be a great story. And that person is Siri Fields. And Siri's in the spot here where, again, I think she's also well situated alongside Parvati on the World Tribe. Again, ride or dies from the very beginning. Also, again, Lisa is a massive fan of Siri. I feel like that's an instant connection as well. And again, Cass is someone to bring in as well. Again, I think that All Women's Alliance is going to be very strong on the World Tribe. While Siri is someone that, again, you would definitely worry about early on in challenges on AU, again, with this being a shorter season and just also these other inherent allies, I actually feel pretty good about Siri for the short term. Again, unlike Parvati, I also feel like there's probably going to be less of a target on Siri in the post-merge, where, again, I think that David-Parvati connection, again, people are at least going to know that they have a connection and potentially want to split that up. Where, again, I think Parvati is the more likely target between her and Siri, where Parvati is just kind of more of a glue coming into the merge. Beyond that, I also feel like Siri has obviously a great reputation, to where if Siri were to get to the end, I think especially a lot of the super fans of the show would want to give Siri the win, to finally give her that win on Survivor. So I think she'll definitely have the support from the world side of things. It's, again, the issue with Siri, and the reason why she's so low on this list is, again, more so on the AU side of things, where, again, this is actually kind of a weird spot where the AU side is actually not very fan heavy, where really, and I think that is kind of a criticism of the casting in general on the AU side, is that, again, for AU versus the world season, you would think you would want AU people that would know the world people, but instead we really only have like George and kind of David, and then like Sarah I know is a fan at a point, and again maybe Janine, but like really it's, again, you have like Shaunie, you have Luke, you have Kirby, who are all like known people who had never watched the show before they went on the show. And again, I just think it's a spot here where I could see a world where Siri struggles to get respect from the AU side of things, but it's still Siri. It's still one of the greatest social players of all time, something that people just inherently want to like. And while, to be fair, that's not always translated to win equity, where, again, on like Panama, her win equity is kind of mixed, or Micronesia, again, she definitely had votes, but it wasn't like this like number one jury threat on the board. Then we see on like Big Bar 25, she's not particularly likely to win a jury vote. I think Siri's like someone that, again, very good social player, especially in terms of navigation through the game, but not always the person that has the most respect from the jury. But again, on this season, I think she just has like inherent jury votes there, along the fact that, again, I think her navigation through the game is one that I actually see a pretty clear path. Again, in a spot where you would think she would struggle on Australian Survivor, considering her not being particularly great at challenges, I actually feel like she has a easy path through the pre-merge. I think the only worry there would be the fact that, again, this like USA contingent being too strong, and like they decide to target Siri out of the USA people. But again, I just don't think that's likely. Again, the likes of Tony, and again, I think this all women's alliance will come together, where I just think Tony's just the easier target there. And again, once you come to merge, I just don't think she's going to be looked at as the biggest threat on the board. Where, again, I think Siri actually has a pretty decent position here. I think it's more so, again, just the worry of, again, I think AU is going to have the advantage, and I think that aspect of national pride might actually harm her here. But still, I think Siri is the most likely to win from the World Tribe. So again, she's here number 6. Number 5, and again, top 5 here, all from AU. Where again, I'm assuming AU is going to dominate. I think they're most likely to have the winner, where I think the jury is likely going to be sacked, which would give the AU person the win. At number 5, though, I think the least likely of that bunch is Janine. And Janine's a player that actually, straight up, I very much debated putting her lower on this list, just where I actually feel like Janine is kind of like the Australian comparison to Lisa on this cast, in the sense that, obviously, again, potential worries of being early boot through the fact that she's just like probably not the most physical person in the world, but I think she is, again, situated decently at the beginning through her connections. But even then, I think even if she gets to the end, I just don't know if she'll have the respect on this specific season, on AU versus the world, the season that, again, you want to declare one of the best of the best. I just don't know if Janine is that person unless she really makes some pretty big plays in a spot where I don't know if that's really Janine's play style. Like on her OG season, like I feel like she's not really the type of person that really makes these big, bold moves, or really the only thing that you can kind of claim is like in like the David vote, I guess. But really, she's just kind of a stable player. She finds her group, sticks with it. Again, I think Janine's in this spot here where, again, I would not expect her to be making these big, bold plays. And through that, again, even if she gets to the end, I think there is the worry that would she even win. However, she's on the AU tribe. And that is really the main reason why she's this high. Because again, I just think the Australians will have this big advantage. I think if she gets to the end in a spot where she's the only Australian at Final Tribal Council, I think she likely just wins based on them wanting to give an Australian the win. Along with the fact that, again, if she makes it to merge, I don't know who's targeting Janine. I feel like she has a pretty smooth path through the game. Where, again, I mean, obviously there are worries early on, especially because in fact that actually of the people in this like core group that I talked about coming together, I actually feel like she's probably one of the least situated of those. So while she does, again, have the connection through David and Luke through playing on Champs Contenders 2 with them, I also could see a world where David is like very vindictive and wanting to get her out in the same way that he did with Daisy coming into All-Stars. Mind you, I do think he has a better connection with Janine than he did with Daisy, considering, again, they're friends post-show, and again, they film Celebrity Apprentice together, where, again, I think that's not that likely to happen, but I think there's at least that world. But also, again, she just doesn't really have a big target on her back, to where, in comparison to the likes of George and David, who, again, obviously have these big bullseyes on their backs, to where I think they're very unlikely to actually make it to the very end. Janine is someone that I actually think is probably one of the most likely of the AU people to make it to the end. It's just more so a factor of, can she win if she gets there? Especially considering the fact that, again, she's obviously someone that doesn't need the money. She's very rich, like a genuine celebrity, to where, again, I think that's obviously something that might harm her jury chances. But again, I think considering how likely it is that she would make it deep into the season, and there is still this aspect of national pride that could help her in a jury vote, I feel like it's good enough to put her here at number 5. Now, number 4, someone that, same thing, there are definitely worries with this player, but they are, again, advantage being on the AU tribe, also being a part of that initial power structure, kind of, and that person is Kirby. And Kirby is, again, in a spot where, again, she's only really connected to this power structure through Luke, where I believe the story is that her and Luke worked for the same mining company years back, again, before either were ever on Survivor. So again, they have connective tissue there. And also just considering the fact that Kirby's a very physical player, someone that would help in challenges early on. I do feel like Kirby is, again, situated fairly well on the Australia tribe for at least the pre-merge. Mind you, I will say Kirby is obviously a very chaotic player, and I feel like through that, there's definitely a chance that she messes up for herself. We saw her almost do that on the original Rebels tribe, where, again, I think there's definitely at least a world where that could happen. But realistically, I think she'll actually kind of be like kind of in the middle of the tribe, in the sense that I believe she also has like a connection to George, to where, and she'll probably be like one of the only lifelines for him. Though, to fair, again, that could also be a worry in the sense that maybe if they're worried that George has an idol, which I assume you will be, they could potentially split the vote on her. And if George has an idol, maybe Kirby could go home. But I do feel like, again, Kirby is someone that I would expect to make it through the initial phase of the game. And when she gets to her merge, I think she could be a very fluid player, where I feel like she's the type of player that won't really stick to just the AU side of things, and will kind of play both sides, and again, probably do so sloppily. And someone that, again, I think plays a very big, bold game that if they were to make it to the end, I think people would be willing to give them the win. Mind you, again, I think her reputation's obviously lesser than that of, again, like the likes of David, Luke, George, Shaunie, but still, I think she's still at the caliber of player that if she makes it to the end, I think there could be some game respect for her. Also, just in general, obviously she's on the AU tribe, and through that, again, I think AU, she have the advantage of, again, having this national pride but beside her as well. And now, beyond that, I think there's at least a little bit of a worry in the fact that she's essentially like the new hotness of the season. Again, she is the most recent AU player to be on this cast, and someone that, again, was a pretty big name on that season as well. It's where I think there's at least like a world where people look at her as like the Rob Cesternino sort of spot of, again, the spot where people want to take you out just to put you down a peg. But to fair, I think George takes up enough of that room to where I don't think there'll be that much room for Kirby to be in that position. Where, again, I think in comparison between Kirby and Janine, I just think Kirby's a much more active player, one that's going to be playing the game in a way that people want to respect their game by the end. To where, while I do think there definitely is that worry of her kind of blowing up her own spot, probably more so than Janine, I feel like Kirby is someone that I see playing the game better than Janine. So again, because that for me, Kirby's here number 4. Now, number 3, we're moving on to a player that probably has one of the bigger reputations on the board. Someone that, again, if they make it to the end, I think the jury would just instantly want to reward this person with a win. The question is, can they get there? But at number 3, I do have Shaunie. And Shaunie is a player here that, again, I actually think I would have debated having her number 1 had she been a little bit better situated on the AU tribe. I think she's in this spot where, again, she's kind of like detached a little bit from the core power structure, where she does have the connection through David, through All-Stars, but I don't know how much of a connection that really is. And really outside that, she doesn't really have any other connections. In a spot where, again, the rest of the tribe is just so entwined, where I think that is at least a worry for Shaunie, that, again, she could be the potential backup in the case that, like, George has an idol or something. But she's the type of player that if she makes their merge, I think Shaunie's extremely dangerous at that point. Again, I very much see you playing both sides, where, again, I could definitely see the likes of Shaunie working alongside the likes of Parvati and Siri. Mind you, again, if she does flip to the other side, would that make the AU side vindictive of her and not want to reward her with the win because of that, because she betrayed her country? But I still feel like Shaunie, again, has this massive reputation to where, again, she's essentially the Siri of Australian Survivor, where if she makes it to the end, I think there will be this notion of wanting to finally give Shaunie her win. And I think that is something that, again, I think could definitely benefit Shaunie in this spot from, again, both that perspective and the fact that she is also someone that could have that AU bump as well, to where Shaunie is someone that, again, I think is positioned well long-term in the game. I think the big worries about Shaunie, and the reason why she's not number 1 here, is simply short-term. I think she's just not in that core power structure at the very beginning. She doesn't really have connections to the likes of Luke, to the likes of Janine or Sarah or Kirby, and also, again, has a potentially rocky one with George, to where, again, I think that is really the main worries here for Shaunie, where really outside that, if Shaunie were to make it to the merge, I feel like Shaunie is in a pretty decent spot at that point. But obviously, there's always going to be this worry, can Shaunie actually pull it out at the very end? Can she win those last few challenges to get to the end? Can she have an ally that will take her to the end? And to be honest, again, I think that's just the worries that I just don't see her having that ally that will actually bring her to the very, very end. But there's still a chance, and there's still a world where she can win those last few challenges and pull out the win. Where, again, I think Shaunie is someone that, if she makes it to the end, I think she's a very likely winner. It's just a matter of, can she get there? But again, for me, good enough to be her number 3. Now, number 2, and at number 2 is somebody that I don't really want to have at number 2. I don't particularly like this person from things we've seen outside the show, but again, in terms of the season, I think he's positioned very, very well. At number 2, we have Luke. And again, this feels like a season made for Luke. I feel like Luke's going to really excel on this season, both short and long term, where, again, I think short term, positioned extremely well. Like, literally right in the middle of the AU tribe, has all of these connections, which, mind you, again, maybe that puts a bullseye on his back. Again, maybe if there's a spot where, like, George has an idol play, maybe he takes out Luke as this person right in the middle. As, again, Luke has a connection to David, has a connection to Janine. Luke has good relationship with Sarah from 2017. Luke has that connection from Kirby from before the season. So, again, he literally has connections with over half of this AU tribe that, again, just puts him in such a powerful position early on. So, again, I see no way that Luke does not make the merge. Now, once he gets to merge, I think that's maybe a different story. I think he does become a bigger target. But again, if David is there alongside him, maybe David's a bigger target. But to be fair, again, David obviously has that Dondi connection. So maybe the World Tribe wouldn't go for David, instead would go for Luke. To where, again, I think that's potentially a worry, is like the very beginning of the merge, especially if the AU tribe doesn't have the numbers. But again, beyond that, like, Luke is someone that, especially if you don't see his online presence, that you want to root for. Again, he has a very sympathetic backstory, and some of that, again, if he makes it to the end, I think people will want to reward him to win, because it's not even just like his backstory at that point. It's also the fact that, again, he is looked at as one of the best to never win. I think giving him his win on AU vs. the World would be something that people would want to see as well. And also, he's on the AU side, to where that also gives him a massive advantage. To where, really, I feel like Luke is the type of player here. Also, again, if he makes it to the end, unless he's against another massive threat from AU side of things, I feel like he's just almost guaranteed to win. I actually think he's probably the biggest jury threat from the AU side. Though he does have that similar issue to Shaunie, and the fact that, will people bring him to the end knowing that he's such a big threat? I feel like the difference here is that I think Luke is more likely to win his way to the end. Again, Luke is someone that obviously dominated in challenges in 2019, and I feel like on this season, in a cast that, again, is not particularly strong from a physical standpoint, I feel like Luke is also pretty poised to win a lot of challenges here, and I could definitely see a world where that ends up coming to effect as well. Where, really, again, I think Luke and Shaunie are kind of in similar spots in the sense that they are these, like, best to never win that people would want to reward with a win at the end. But I feel like differences here is that Luke, again, has a lot more connections coming this season, while also Luke is a lot more likely to win his way to the end. So again, I think Luke is essentially a step above Shaunie on this ranking at number 2. Now, number 1, my number 1 person. This person was my winner pick from the season when we saw the cast fly out, though there are some drawbacks to this pick. But either way, at number 1, my winner pick for AU vs. the World is Sarah Talik. And again, Sarah is this player here that, like Luke, very well positioned on this tribe. Not exactly like perfectly positioned like Luke is, but still, again, has connections to both David and Luke. And I think that will be like kind of the core power structure at the beginning of the season, to where I feel like Sarah is very well situated. Leon, I also see her again connecting with Shaunie, to where I could also see that being a potential relationship, to where again, I just think Sarah is someone that I would be mind blown if Sarah does not make it to the merge of the season, just considering, again, I just think she has so many connections early on, and also, like, who's targeting her? Are you really going to target Sarah over the likes of David and Luke? Really, in general, that is kind of the idea around my winner pick of Sarah, is the fact that I think she's not a particularly big threat to where people aren't going to be threatened to be taking her out. Again, are you really going to take out Sarah over, again, once we get to it, the likes of Siri, the likes of Parvati, the likes of Bentele, the likes of Tony? So I think Sarah definitely comes into the season with kind of like an Amber sort of effect of her being kind of the person that is probably one of the bigger question marks of like why they're here, but also someone that is a very threatening player. Mind you, again, definitely made some questionable decisions on her original season, but still someone that is a massive super fan of the show, someone that clearly knows the show well, someone that is now a bit older, probably wiser. So again, I think the big worry here would be win equity, and really Sarah's reputation here isn't that far away from the likes of Kirby and Janine, but I think there's a few differences here. First, the fact that, again, in comparison to Janine, I think she'll play a more aggressive game. I think she'll be more like Kirby in that sense, to where I think if she were to get to the end, I think she would play a game that would be respected by the jury. Also, again, she's going to be favored by the AU side of things in particular. Again, she has so many connections on that AU side, to where I think if she were to get to the end, again, not against the likes of David, Luke, or Shaunie, which again, I assume she's going to try not to, I think she very likely gets those AU votes, which again, I'm assuming will be the majority coming into the merge to begin with. Even beyond that, I feel like Sarah is definitely going to fit in with that women's contingent on the World Tribe, to where I could already see her working alongside the likes of Parvati and Suri and building connections there, to where Sarah ended up being my winner pick here, simply because, again, I do think she is well positioned early on, will play aggressive game at the end, and also has some inherent jury votes, to where, while again, I think there definitely is that question mark of can she win against everybody on the board. I also feel like, again, she's the type of player that will be playing very aggressively to not get to the end against the players that she'll likely lose against. And I just feel like obviously Sarah's better situated early on than Shaunie. Also, straight up, I just also didn't want to pick Luke as my winner pick because I feel like that'd be really depressing. But I like Sarah more, so I went with Sarah here as my number one on my preseason power ranking. But there we go. I mean, that is my preseason power ranking for AU versus the world. Now, obviously, when the season airs, I'll be doing a season review and a player ranking afterwards. Now, again, because I am spoiled, I am unlikely to do a mid-season power ranking. Depending on how long the show runs for, I mean, there's a chance I do some sort of like mid-season checkup, my opinions on the season, but again, I would not bank on it, especially considering, again, it's a shorter season. I doubt it's going to air over a particularly long period of time, and I think more than likely just expect the review and player ranking. Beyond that, obviously, again, down the road, I still plan on ranking every AU player. I am waiting for AU vs. the World in particular to end. So while I won't be like formally including AU vs. the World on that ranking, as for me, this is more of an exhibition season than it is an actual formal AU season. I think it's still a spot where how the AU players play on this season will potentially affect that ranking in a similar way that Reindeer Games did for my Big Brother ranking. So where, again, expect that video way down the road, and obviously just in general, still covering all the other shows, Survivor, Big Brother, Amazing Race, Challenge. So stay tuned for videos and all those things. And if you want to keep up my opinions on AU vs. the World as it's airing, you can follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMarineReview, where I stream every Wednesday and Sunday night at 11-ish o'clock Eastern time. So you can follow me there. But for now, those are my preseason thoughts on AU versus the World. Thank you for watching.